Hi, I'm Laura and I'm here to tell you about the books that I read over the month of June. I'm feeling rather proud of myself because, as you might know, last month I really didn't film or edit this video until the middle of the month. So this month I'm getting in early at the first weekend of July to talk about all the books that I read in June. So all the books that I read in May, I talked about mid-June, slightly after mid-June. I also think that I undersold that video by one book, but I'll mention which book it was when I get to its sequel. So over the course of June I read 4 books. I enjoyed all of them very much. Yeah. Which, you know, is a good thing. I didn't read anything that was just fluff for the sake of getting another book on the list, which I think I have been guilty of in the past. So these were 4 books, I enjoyed all of them. Let me tell you about them. First up, I read Imago by Octavia Butler. This is the 3rd of the Lilith's Brood or Xenogenesis trilogy. It is sold under both names, which is a little bit confusing. It was published in 1989. Lilith's Brood, generally the trilogy talks about the interaction between the Oankali, who are an alien race, and humans in like a sort of post-human, post-nuclear fallout situation. So the first book, Dawn, tracked Lilith, who's the human mother of this brood of alien-human hybrids. The second book tracked the first male human-born construct child called Akin, and this 3rd book tracks Jodas, who is the first Oankali child, which is like a neutered gender, important puzzle piece in terms of breeding new human Oankali. So this is kind of the height of the species that they've now finally got, construct Oankali. The title really interested me when I started looking at it because Imago is, or I'm sure, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Imago is basically the adult form of insects that go through a metamorphosis life cycle. So things like dragonflies or cicadas, when they hatch as larvae, then they go through a metamorphosis to a nymph phase, and then they go through another metamorphosis into their adult form, which then they're sexually mature and can breed and all that jazz. So Imago is like the coming of sexual maturity of the constructs, the mesh between the humans and the Oankali, and now they've got a human-born construct, Uloi, which is like the final puzzle piece to making this new race succeed. There are previous tensions that the book builds on, like humans versus Oankali. There's like the resistor community, and the core plot of this book is that Jodas goes off on its own and finds some humans as yet untouched by Oankali, and it's really like taken aback by how different biologically and how like genetically unaltered they are, but they're also like dealing with horrible results of inbreeding over generations, because the new human life cycle, once the Oankali have done great things like cure cancer, goes on for a very, very long time. So Jodas is like, why are these humans so short-lived? This is so weird, I must fix them. So it fixes them and ensures that their community can continue. I think Butler does really well with like the essentials of what it means to be human, and then particularly in juxtaposition of these non-humans or near-humans. So you kind of have the contrast between the constructs who know a lot and the Oankali, particularly the Uloi, who have a deep sensory knowledge of all genetic processes, and like nature, nurture, and like what is the essential nature of humanity, and are we hamstrung by the intelligence versus hierarchy, which is the conflict that the novel centralizes around. The book focuses particularly on this actually very non-human character, and despite that it's a really compelling story, and like Jodas's emotions and visceral responses to things, it's a very like the whole trilogy, very visceral, very like embodied and feeling feeling with extra tentacles as they're growing, like the itchy sensory spots. And Jodas, when it's learning, because it's a new to character, when it's learning how to be Uloi, it wants to go in and fix things, and sometimes it's so passionate about like changing the structure of something that it actually ends up causing more harm. So its interaction with its Uloi parent Mikanj is also really interesting. What a weird series. I think I want to go back and read Lilith's Brood again, because that was like, I didn't anticipate it like spinning out into this long extended story. And I think that extended story does bring a lot of richness, and the focus on first a human, then a human-born Oankali construct, and then like the end of the metamorphosis, this human-born construct Uloi, is a really intriguing development of the three characters and how the society is changing. Book 2 that I read and I finished is the place where I get to mention the book that I left off May's list. So actually I read 7 books in May. In May I finished Royal Assassin, which is book 2 of Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy. So I carried straight on with that because by gum it's compelling. So Assassin's Quest is Farseer book 3 by Robin Hobb, published in 1997. It's so full of feels. I had this whole time when I was reading book 2, I kept on going, now I remember this character is going to be a bastard, but I don't remember how and where. And like, I knew the plot thing that was going to happen, but I'd forgotten. I vaguely remembered like the string that had to be pulled for it to all fall apart, but like the build up around that was entirely missing. Now book 3 I remembered far less of. I remembered the beginning bit and I remembered the very end, and the whole middle was kind of like a things happen. I think they go on a quest because quest's in the title. I know someone who doesn't really like Robin Hobb as a writer because they can't bear how much she puts her poor characters through. Poor Fitz is all I can say. What a guy. Every time you think he's going to get what he needs and what he wants in life, someone comes and stabs him in the back, or like imprisons him or poisons him, or like there's a lot of like, oh my gosh, he's finally gonna get, oh no, oh. So she kicks him when he's down a lot, which I understand some people might be a bit frustrated with, but her prose is just the best thing. Like, I like me some epic fantasy. Some epic fantasists are less strong on prose. Robin Hobb, you know, you really think that she could write like instructions on how to build a table and I'd be hanging on every word. So that's really awesome that it's so good. I think that some of the characters are really well created, really well rounded. In this book there were a few characters that I found slightly weaker, and some of my favourite characters don't really appear in this book except in flashbacks or in like second-hand or third-hand news. So book 2 was really, really strong. Book 3, I don't want to say it was not a good ending, because it really was. Like, it's great. I'm glad that it ends the way it does. But yeah, it's a lot longer than the previous 2 installments, and you feel the length a bit more. It feels very questy, and in my notes I've written long journey, very walk, such trial and tribulation, much oh no. So that's the gist. There is a little bit of repetitiveness in terms of Fitz is walking. Fitz is going to rescue Verity because Verity has imprinted come to me using the skill in Fitz's mind. Fitz must go to Verity. Fitz is on his way to Verity. Someone betrays him. He ends up captured. And then he escapes. And then Fitz must go to Verity. He ends up beaten up and left for dead. Someone finds Fitz, helps him carry on his quest. Fitz must go to Verity. So that's kind of the gist of the book. I think that the nature of magic systems in the Farseer, in the realm of the Elderlings as it's called, is very interesting, and I'd love to know more about how they work and how they interact, and I think that does come into some of the other books, so I'm going to carry on reading. It's a mark of how brilliant Hobbs's prose is that I finished Assassin's Quest on my Kindle, closed the Kindle cover, put it down on the couch, walked over to the bookshelf and took down my copy of the first book of the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which is the second trilogy in the sequence, and was like, cool, this is now firmly on the to-read list. Part of what makes this book so great is the characterization and the relationships that Fitz has with the Fool, who's one of the key characters throughout the trilogy and goes on to its own trilogy. Then Night Eyes, who's Fitz's wolf wit buddy, companion. Buddy seems a bit light-hearted for the nature of the relationship they have. They're basically two halves of a whole. Verity, who's the king that Fitz is going to go and rescue, with Ketrican, the queen. I think Ketrican's awesome. She's such a badass character. I really look forward to seeing the impact of her coming back to rule with Verity's child. The fathering of that child was a little bit awkward. Anyway, I missed the characters that you get to know so well in the first two books, particularly Chade and Burrich, who are Fitz's adopted dad and weird mad scientist uncle guy, who is the assassin master who trains Fitz as an assassin. Molly's cool. Molly and Burrich are now living somewhere, bringing up Fitz's child. Regal, who's kind of the big bad. That was kind of one of the challenges for me with this book, is that the undoing of Regal is not nearly as satisfying, considering how much trial and torment he's poured on Fitz. So I think that was a little bit underwhelming. So I'd love to have a little bit more dramatic, I don't know, denouement. I want like more aggression there. Like, for a book that's full of violence and full of bloodshed and full of heartbreak, the big bad gets off a bit too easy. But maybe this is going somewhere that I can't see yet, because I've only read one of the several sequences in the realm of the Elderlings. Book 3 that I read was Remarkable Creatures by Tracy Chevalier. It was published in 2009. I know that Chevalier is a really good historical fiction writer, because she also wrote Girl with the Pearl Earring, but I've never actually read any of her work before, so this was quite a new and interesting thing. I read this one as an Audible book. It was really nicely narrated. Remarkable Creatures tells the story of Mary Anning and Elizabeth Philpott, set in 1820s in Lyme Regis, and Mary Anning is the person about whom She Sells Seashells on the Seashore is written. She sells seashells on the seashore. She sells seashells. You see? So Mary Anning was an amateur paleontologist who discovered the fossils of an ichthyosaur in the hills around Lyme Regis. So she was a historical person. This is loosely based on historical events. Elizabeth Philpott is a well-to-do but down on the family's luck spinster whose brother cannot afford to keep them in London, so he decides to move the unmarried sisters to Lyme Regis, where they can live more comfortably on less money. And the whole book goes around Elizabeth Philpott with her middle-class or upper middle-class sensibilities, genteel sensibilities, trying to coach Mary Anning into a better understanding of the role that she plays as the excavator of the ichthyosaur. Part of the core of the novel is about the discovery of the ichthyosaur, which at the time was quite a challenging discovery for geologists and naturalists around the world, because it was not an animal that anyone recognized. So they tried to call it a crocodile for a while, because, you know, in 1820 it's difficult to think of, in 1820 society it would be very difficult to think of a god who created creatures that he didn't look after long term. Like, the fact that these creatures are extinct is a bit of a biblical challenge to some people. And that meditation of, like, the nature of God and the nature of science, and is there some of science, and like how literally can we take the creation of the world in 6 days. There are various reverends who come fossil hunting, and Elizabeth Philpott has to like navigate being in polite society but also kind of being a bit of a rebel because she's into this paleontology thing. There's like minor romance side plots, but the core relationship in the novel is between Mary Anning and Elizabeth Philpott, which crosses class lines. Mary Anning is definitely not invested in propriety. She frequently takes gentlemen on fossil hunting walks, and never really wears gloves, so she's always covered in like Lyme Regis clay and is always a bit dirty, and like the town goes, "Oh, you're taking gentlemen on walks. Now I wonder what you could possibly be doing." So that's quite a thing, because Elizabeth Philpott's very focused on propriety. So you've got the propriety versus the doesn't really care about propriety. You've got this like down on their luck upper middle class versus sometimes has to sell the table to be able to afford food and coal to heat the house, and the fossils that unite them, and the fossils that like actually lead to several quite big fights between the two of them, and how their friendship actually exceeds all of those challenges of society. I'm keen to read a bit more Chevalier after this. I found it quite compelling. I really enjoyed Elizabeth Philpott's characterization of how various people lead with different features. So somebody leads with their eyes, or somebody else leads with their hands, somebody else leads with their jaw. I found that really compelling, and I'd like to think a bit more about how that would look. I think this is quite an interesting period in history, and I know that there's recently been a movie about Mary Anning that stars Kate Winslet, I think. I'll double check on that, because now I really, really just want to go to Lyme Regis and find some fossils. Maybe I'll find an icky of my own. Last but definitely not least, I read Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, which was published first privately in 1923 and has had a long and nebulous history of publication. I read this book because it's the book of the month for the Manchester WI book club. I've never been in a book club before. I joined the WI. I'm loving it because there are people and I get to talk to people. I'm making friends, and I know that sounds really cheesy, but we moved internationally and 4 months later the pandemic started, so I don't know that many people who live around here, and I'm learning to meet people again through Manchester WI. Anyway, so Bookish Broads, which is a cool name for a book club, is reading Lady Chatterley's Lover because the theme for the month was banned books. Lady Chatterley's Lover was banned because of its scandalous nature and use of 4-letter words and so much description of sex. Whoa. Which, you know, I've read some other books that probably could have been banned for those reasons. Just litfic, like Hanif Qureshi's Buddha of Suburbia, that in first year I really couldn't deal with, because the lecturer was like, this is all about how knowledge and sex are so intertwined, and young and innocent me was like, I don't want to read books like that. Anyway, Lady Chatterley's Lover, yes, there is quite a lot of sex. There's quite a lot of conversation about how sex is like one form of touch, and is it really that different from dancing or talking? It's just a different form of intimacy. Yes, there's rather liberal use of the F word and the C word, so I do see why that could have been problematic for people who were very, very faint of reading it, thought that they were getting some modern classic, and then they suddenly got lots of people giving each other a good... It's very atmospherically written, the setting is very evocative, so the Lady Chatterley, young Constance Bird, gets married to Clifford Chatterley, who is part of the landed gentry, whose Rabbit Warren-like country seat is just within earshot of the coal mining operations in the Midlands. So she's like brought young into this quite constrained, like gloomy, entrapping space. And to top that all off, Lady Chatterley has married Sir Clifford just during the course of the First World War, and then he went off to be a soldier and unfortunately was quite severely injured and comes home and uses a wheelchair and is unable to father any children or satisfy his wife sexually, which means that he probably wasn't trying that hard. Anyway, Constance Chatterley as a character is really interesting. I think D.H. Lawrence does quite well to get into the mind of his characters, and there are different passages. While there's quite an omniscient narrative voice, and you feel the D.H. Lawrence touch on the prose. Not that I've read much D.H. Lawrence before, but this was quite an interesting one, because you can feel where there's superimposition of D.H. Lawrence, but then you also get these like stream of consciousness from a character's perspective, and focusing mostly on Constance Chatterley because she is Lady Chatterley and she is who we've come to read about. I'm not a huge fan of most of the other characters, to be honest. I think that Constance's sister Hilda is quite judgy. Sir Clifford is a bit of a wet in a weed and like very much an emblem of the impotent upper class in the face of rampant modernism. I'm going to do a whole video about this and probably a blog about it because there's lots to dig into. Like, it's very symbolic. You've got the upper class who's immobilized and impotent in the face of rising industry. Welcome to the 20th century. The only other character that I really found quite compelling wasn't even Oliver Mellors, the groundkeeper who had it away roughly with the lady on over the park bench or wherever, was Mrs. Bolton, who was brought in to be Sir Clifford's carer when Connie was taking a bit of strain in that role. She was brought in particularly when Connie didn't want to be spending all of her life lifting her husband in and out of his chair, and just listening to his endless prattle and his, like, I don't know, he's very self-centered, so that's kind of, I have quite a lot of sympathy for Connie, who isn't in the situation she signed up to be in. Mrs. Bolton is very much like part of the town, part of the gossip, so that's quite interesting because she comes with like her own stream of consciousness, and it's a very distinct voice compared to like Clifford's or Connie's or Mellors, and so it's like, it's very cool and weird. I enjoyed the prose. There's lots of like extended metaphor. There's conversation about how this actually represents that, like there's a lot of representationality and a lot of excuse me, and a lot of like general anxiety about class, about position, about the coming modern age, industry anxiety, coal anxiety. What are we going to do when the coal is not as profitable as it was? So-and-so's house is going to be bought and pulled down. Things that I really enjoy. I enjoyed that Lady Chatterley knew what she wanted and she was gonna go get it. in all the ways. I think that it's probably one of my favorite books from that era. And sure, I've not read a whole lot of 1920s content, so I think I'm comparing it rather unfairly to that other great 1920s classic, Great Gatsby, which is also full of like metaphor for a crumbling, decaying society and how we're going to deal with the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg watching us everywhere we go and stuff. So this is probably one of my favorites of that era. Beats Gatsby solidly. It's got a lot more, I need to do a bit more research about D.H. Lawrence, but the stream of consciousness process feels much closer to Virginia Woolf, which I really like Virginia Woolf as well, so kind of more on the Virginia Woolf spectrum than the American spectrum. I've read Hemingway, I've read Fitzgerald, neither of those particularly gelled with me. I've read Virginia Woolf, and also I've read P.G. Wodehouse and Agatha Christie, also from roughly this era. Far prefer those two to any of the others. So in terms of classic literature, I think I'll read more D.H. Lawrence, see how I like it. Though I will admit, Lady Chatterley's Lover probably wouldn't have made a very acceptable high school English reading list. I'm just imagining sitting in my high school classroom that we read Great Gatsby, being alternately bored because it's quite a dull book, and going, okay, cool, well I guess we've got to find some metaphor, and all the metaphor there's pretty heavy-handed, so you know, it's good to write about in a metric essay. I don't think we could have done the same with Lady Chatterley's Lover. I don't think that a group of 18-year-olds could have dealt very well with a conversation about Mellows's John Thomas meeting Lady Chatterley's Lady Jane, which is legit the terms they use frequently, and the constant cupping of haunches and stuff. It's like, yeah. High school students probably couldn't deal with the threading of flowers through pubic hair. It's possibly a bit much. But it's a good book. It's a good book. I'm glad I read it. I'm looking forward to discussing it with people. I think that it's having, like, from the Facebook group, half the people are really liking it and half the people are like, why the hell am I reading this? This is way too much. Yeah. I can see why it was potentially a banned book, but also I've read way worse skanky lit fic that's all about sex and books and knowledge and yeah. I'll have to read more Lawrence and see how I feel. Anyway, that was my 4 books for the month. It was quite a fun read because, yeah, no pulp, no books just to get the book count up. I'm still doing quite a lot of sewing. This is my ballroom skirt that now has beautiful crinoline mesh tape on the hem so it stands out beautifully. I've continued my historical sewing pattern. I had this brilliant idea for a video that I was going to read snippets of Lady Chatterley's Lover while hand stitching slightly period inappropriate undergarments with like a 1890s undergarments, and the book's set in 1920, so that wouldn't have quite worked, and I took a lot of video for that, and it's all me making basically this face, and that's not good. It's not good watching. So yeah, I need to figure out how the wonders that are Rachel Maxey and Bernadette Banner make during boring tasks look exciting, and maybe the hint is not to focus on one's face quite so much. So I've got a corset that I'm sewing on, I've been doing some pattern making, and I'm still reading quite a lot. So I've got a Kazuo Ishiguro book on the go, I've taken down 2 fantasy books, one of which is a reread because I want to read The Wheel of Time book 1 before the series hits Amazon Prime, which is coming out later this year, and that's going to be so cool. And I have the Robin Hobb book to read, and I'm still reading a book set in Devon as my light-hearted between things read. I'm also on the lookout for a book or 2 to add to my Counties of England reading list because I'm doing a little bit of travelling next month, which will be exciting. This month. It's July. It's this month. I'm going to some places this month. I'm going to the Cotswolds, hopefully. I still need to book, but I'm going to the Cotswolds. So I will be back hopefully sooner than in a month's time with another book wrap, because I've got a few more videos planned. I just haven't got around to filming them. So keep well. Let me know if you've got books to recommend about the Cotswolds or anything else that you think I might enjoy. Have you ever read Lady Chatterley's Lover? Did you think that it was too much? Did you think it was just enough? Let me know.